Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe, like, and share this story with someone who still believes that kindness can change a life. Because today's story is a powerful reminder that greatness doesn't always begin with wealth, talent, or opportunity. Sometimes it begins with a single act of compassion. Now let's begin. The stadium in New York roared like a living creature. More than 80,000 fans stood on their feet, their eyes fixed on a young Moroccan wearing number 10. The scoreboard showed 93 minutes. The World Cup semifinal was tied. One final opportunity remained. One kick, one moment, one chance to change history. Youssef El Mansouri stood over the ball, his chest rising and falling beneath the red jersey of Morocco. Around him, exhausted players waited. Millions watched from televisions around the world. Commentators struggled to control the excitement in their voices. The pressure was enough to crush most men. Yet Youssef looked strangely calm. He lowered his eyes toward the grass and took a slow breath. In the front rows sat kings, celebrities, former football legends, and powerful businessmen from every corner of the globe. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that 10 years earlier, this same young man had walked barefoot through the snow-covered mountains of Morocco, carrying a sack of firewood on his back. None of them knew he had once gone to bed hungry more nights than he could count. None of them knew that football had started not in a stadium, but on a rocky hillside where every kick sent dust into the air. As the referee adjusted the wall and checked his watch, Youssef's mind drifted backward. Not to trophies, not to fame, not to contracts worth millions. His mind returned to a cold winter morning in the Atlas Mountains. A morning when he was only a poor shepherd boy searching for food. A morning when fate quietly stepped into his path disguised as a dying stranger buried beneath the snow. And if Youssef had chosen to walk away that day, if he had ignored the tracks hidden beneath the storm, if he had decided that another man's suffering was not his problem, then Morocco would never have seen him wear that jersey. The crowd continued chanting his name. The referee raised his whistle. The entire world held its breath. But before that kick changed history, we must go back to where the story truly began. 10 years earlier, the Atlas Mountains stood silent beneath a blanket of winter snow. Hidden among the valleys was a tiny village that most maps ignored. The people there measured wealth differently. A full meal was wealth. Dry firewood was wealth. A healthy goat was wealth. 15-year-old Youssef owned none of those things. Every morning before sunrise, he climbed the mountain paths with his family's small herd. His boots were worn through. His jacket had been patched so many times that no one remembered its original color. Yet every day, he carried something more valuable than money. He carried a dream. While other boys spoke about leaving the village to find work, Youssef spoke about football. He spoke about stadiums he had only seen in magazines. He spoke about World Cup matches he listened on an old radio that barely worked. Most adults smiled politely when they heard him. Others laughed. Some told him to stop wasting time. In their eyes, dreams belonged to rich children living in cities, not shepherd boys living in forgotten mountains. But Youssef never argued. Instead, every afternoon he gathered his friends on a rocky field overlooking the valley. Their goalposts were piles of stones. Their football was old and nearly destroyed. Yet when the game started, the mountains disappeared. The poverty disappeared. The hunger disappeared. Only football remained. On that particular morning, the weather felt different. Thick clouds rolled over the peaks. Snow fell harder than usual. Even the goats seemed uneasy. Youssef was collecting firewood near a narrow ridge when he noticed something unusual in the snow. At first, it looked like an animal trail. Then he saw another mark, a boot print, then another. The footprints staggered across the mountainside before suddenly disappearing. Youssef frowned and stepped closer. A few feet away, he saw something else. A torn backpack half buried beneath the snow. Next to it was a dark stain spreading across the white ground. Blood. The wind howled through the valley. Youssef's heart began to pound. Someone was out there. Someone was hurt. And somewhere beyond the ridge, hidden by the storm, a man was fighting for his life. Youssef stood frozen for several seconds. The wind pushed against his back while snow whipped across the mountainside. Every instinct told him to return to the village before the storm became worse. The mountains were unforgiving. People disappeared here every winter. Sometimes they were found. Most times they were not. He looked again at the blood-stained snow beside the torn backpack. Whoever had left those footprints was in serious trouble. For a moment, he thought about his mother waiting at home. He thought about the goats. He thought about the coming storm. Then he made his choice. Dropping the bundle of firewood onto the ground, Youssef followed the tracks. The footprints became weaker as he climbed higher. Some steps were deep. Others dragged through the snow as if the person had barely remained standing. After nearly 20 minutes of searching, Youssef spotted something dark beneath a rocky ledge. His heart skipped. A man lay partially buried in snow. His face was pale. His lips were blue. One arm was twisted beneath him at an unnatural angle. Expensive climbing equipment surrounded him, but much of it had been damaged. Nearby, shattered poles and torn ropes suggested something terrible had happened higher up the mountain. Youssef rushed forward and knelt beside him. The man's eyes were closed. His breathing was weak and irregular. For a terrifying moment, Youssef thought he was already dead. Then the man's eyelids fluttered. Barely visible, barely alive. "Sir," Youssef called. "Can you hear me?" The stranger's eyes opened slightly. Confused, exhausted. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper escaped his lips. One word, "Help." Then he lost consciousness again. Youssef looked around desperately. There was no one else. No rescue team. No helicopter. No road. Nothing except endless snow and jagged mountains. The village was nearly 3 hours away on foot. The man would never survive that journey alone. Youssef swallowed hard. He was only 15 years old. The stranger outweighed him by nearly twice his size. Yet as another icy gust swept across the ridge, Youssef knew exactly what would happen if he walked away. The man would die before sunset, and that was something he could not allow. The journey back to the village became the hardest thing Youssef had ever done. Using broken climbing rope and a wooden sled normally used to transport firewood, he created a makeshift rescue stretcher. The storm grew stronger with every passing minute. Snow reduced visibility to only a few yards. Several times the sled became stuck between rocks. Several times Youssef slipped and fell into the snow. Each time he forced himself back to his feet. His hands bled. His shoulders burned. His lungs felt ready to burst. But he kept moving. Hour after hour, he dragged the unconscious stranger through the mountains. By the time the first lights of the village appeared, darkness had already begun to settle over the valley. Villagers rushed toward him in shock. They had never seen Youssef return with a wounded foreigner. Together, they carried the man into the small family home. The village doctor examined him under the glow of an oil lamp. Broken ribs, severe dehydration, hypothermia, a dislocated shoulder. The doctor shook his head slowly. Another few hours, and he would have died. Youssef's mother covered the stranger with blankets. His little sister warmed water near the fire. Everyone helped despite having very little themselves. For 2 days the man drifted between sleep and consciousness. Sometimes he mumbled in French. Sometimes he spoke names nobody recognized. Sometimes he stared into the flames with haunted eyes. On the third morning, he finally woke properly. Sunlight filtered through the small window. The smell of fresh bread filled the room. The stranger slowly sat up and looked around. His gaze settled on Youssef. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then the man asked quietly, "Why did you save me?" Youssef seemed confused by the question. "Because you needed help," he answered. The man stared at him. In his world, people rarely did things without expecting something in return. Yet this boy had risked his life for a complete stranger. A faint smile appeared on the man's face. "My name is Gabriel," he said. Youssef smiled back. Neither of them realized that this simple introduction would eventually change both of their lives forever. Over the next week, Gabriel slowly became part of village life. His injuries prevented him from traveling, forcing him to remain in the small mountain community far longer than he had expected. For the first time in decades, he lived without assistance, without bodyguards, without meetings, and without the constant noise of wealth and power. Every morning, he woke to the sound of goats crossing the valley. Every evening, he sat beside a fire, while villagers shared stories beneath the stars. What surprised him most was not the poverty. He had seen poverty before. What surprised him was the generosity. Yusef's family had almost nothing, yet they shared everything they had. Bread was divided equally. Tea was poured for every guest. No one asked Gabriel for money. No one tried to impress him. To them, he was simply a traveler who needed help. One afternoon, Gabriel sat outside, watching children play football on a dusty patch of ground overlooking the village. The field was uneven. Stones covered much of the surface. The goalposts were made from old wooden branches. Yet the boys played as if they were performing in front of 80,000 fans. Gabriel smiled. Then he noticed Yusef. At first there seemed nothing unusual about him. Thin, quiet, wearing worn-out shoes that were barely holding together. But the longer Gabriel watched, the more curious he became. Yusef rarely kept the ball for himself. Instead, he constantly scanned the field. He moved before others reacted. He seemed to know where the ball would go several seconds before everyone else. Again and again, he created opportunities that nobody else saw. Gabriel leaned forward in his chair. He had spent 40 years around professional sports. He had watched thousands of young players. Something about this boy felt different. Then came the moment he could not ignore. A loose ball rolled down a rocky slope nearly 40 yards away. Most children stopped chasing it. The angle was impossible. The terrain unwavering. Yet Yusef sprinted after it, struck the ball with one touch, and curved it perfectly between two large rocks before dropping it directly at a teammate's feet. The entire play lasted less than 3 seconds. Gabriel sat silently. A strange feeling stirred inside him. It was the same feeling he experienced whenever he discovered exceptional talent. For the first time since arriving in the village, Gabriel was no longer thinking about survival. He was thinking about possibility. That evening, Gabriel found Yusef sitting alone outside his family's house. The sun was disappearing behind the Atlas Mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks gold and orange. The boy held an old football in his hands. Most of its original surface had peeled away long ago, yet he treated it like a treasure. Gabriel sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. They simply watched the valley below. Finally, Gabriel broke the silence. "Where did you learn to play football?" Yusef laughed softly. "Here." Gabriel smiled. "No coach. No. No academy. No. No organized team." Yusef shook his head again. Gabriel stared at him. The answer made no sense. Everything he had observed suggested advanced instincts normally developed through years of professional training. Yet this boy had learned entirely on his own. "Then why football?" Gabriel asked. Yusef looked down at the worn ball. His expression changed. Suddenly, he seemed older than 15. "Because when I play, I forget everything else," he said quietly. Gabriel listened. "I forget being poor. I forget winter. I forget hunger. For a little while, I feel like anything is possible." The word struck Gabriel harder than he expected. He had spent his entire life around athletes, chasing trophies and money. Yet this boy loved football for something much simpler: hope. As darkness settled across the mountains, Yusef stood and invited Gabriel inside. On the wall above his bed hung newspaper pictures cut from old magazines. Some were faded. Others were torn. There were photographs of famous players, World Cup moments, and legendary stadiums. In the center hung a single piece of paper written in careful handwriting. Gabriel stepped closer and read the words. "One day I will play at the World Cup." For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he looked at Yusef. The boy seemed embarrassed. "It's silly, I know." Gabriel slowly shook his head. "No," he replied. "The world changes because of people who refuse to stop believing." Later that night, long after everyone had gone to sleep, Gabriel remained awake beside the fire. Outside, the mountains were silent. Inside, a decision was beginning to take shape. The following days passed more quickly than either of them expected. Gabriel's strength gradually returned. He could walk again without assistance. His shoulder still hurt, and his ribs had not fully healed, but everyone knew his stay in the village was coming to an end. Strangely, the thought made Yusef feel sad. During the short time they had spent together, Gabriel had become more than a guest. He had become a friend. Every evening they talked beside the fire, sometimes about football, sometimes about life beyond the mountains. Gabriel never spoke much about himself. Whenever Youssef asked questions, he would smile and change the subject. Yet he always listened carefully whenever the boy spoke about his dreams. One evening, as snow drifted softly outside, Gabriel asked a simple question. If you could have anything in the world, what would it be? Youssef did not hesitate. To play at the World Cup. Gabriel nodded. Not money. No, not a big house. No, not fame. Youssef smiled and shook his head. Those things would be nice. But football comes first. Gabriel stared into the fire. The answer seemed to affect him deeply. Most people he met spent their lives chasing wealth. Yet this boy, who owned almost nothing, dreamed only of earning the right to wear his country's colors. A few minutes later, Youssef disappeared into the next room and returned carrying a worn notebook. The cover was damaged. Several pages were missing. He handed it to Gabriel without saying a word. Inside were hundreds of handwritten notes. Match results, player statistics, tactical sketches copied from magazines, drawings of stadiums, lists of training exercises. Every page reflected years of obsession. Gabriel turned the pages slowly. Then he found something that made him stop. Near the back of the notebook was a list titled Promises to Myself. The first promise read, Never give up. The second, Help my family. The third, Play for Morocco. The fourth, Reach the World Cup. Gabriel closed the notebook carefully. For several seconds, he could not speak. Eventually, he looked at Youssef and said quietly, Most people dream. Very few prepare. Youssef frowned. Gabriel smiled. You are preparing. That night, Gabriel remained awake long after everyone else had gone to sleep. For the first time in many years, he felt something stronger than ambition. He felt responsibility. 3 days later the time came for Gabriel to leave. The entire village gathered near the narrow road leading down from the mountains. The snowstorm had passed. The sky was clear. For the first time since the accident, a rescue vehicle had finally managed to reach the village. Youssef stood quietly beside his mother and sister. He expected a dramatic goodbye, perhaps a promise, perhaps advice, perhaps some life-changing secret. Instead, Gabriel did something unexpected. He thanked everyone individually. He shook hands with the village doctor. He thanked Youssef's mother for her kindness. He thanked the villagers who had helped save his life. Then he turned toward Youssef. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Gabriel extended his hand. Thank you. Youssef laughed. I've already heard that 100 times. Gabriel smiled. Then hear it one more time. The two shook hands. Gabriel looked as though he wanted to say something else, something important, but instead he simply nodded and climbed into the vehicle. Minutes later, he disappeared down the mountain road. And just like that, he was gone. The village slowly returned to normal. Days passed, then a week. Life continued exactly as before. Youssef returned to tending goats, returned to collecting firewood, returned to playing football on the rocky field. Part of him wondered if he would ever see Gabriel again. Another part told him not to be foolish. Men like Gabriel belonged to another world. Then, on the 8th morning after Gabriel's departure, a strange sound echoed through the valley. At first people thought it was thunder. Then the sound grew louder and louder. Villagers emerged from their homes and looked toward the sky. Children pointed upward. Goats scattered across the hillsides. Youssef stepped outside and froze. A helicopter was approaching the village. Not a rescue helicopter. Not a military helicopter. A sleek black aircraft unlike anything the villagers had ever seen. It circled once above the valley before beginning its descent. Dust and snow exploded into the air. The entire village watched in stunned silence. And standing beside the landing zone, staring through the swirling snow, Youssef suddenly saw a familiar figure step out of the helicopter. For several seconds, nobody moved. The helicopter's blades continued spinning above the landing zone, while snow and dust swirled through the air. Villagers shielded their faces and stared in disbelief. Youssef stood frozen. The man stepping out of the aircraft was Gabriel. But he was no longer dressed like the injured traveler they had rescued from the mountain. He wore a dark overcoat. Behind him emerged several men and women carrying briefcases and equipment. Two luxury SUVs were parked nearby after arriving earlier through the mountain road. Everything about the scene felt unreal. Gabriel walked directly toward Youssef. A smile appeared on his face. "Good morning," he said. Youssef blinked. "Gabriel?" Gabriel laughed softly. "Yes." Before Youssef could ask another question, one of the men accompanying Gabriel stepped forward. He looked at Youssef's mother and politely introduced himself. He explained that Gabriel Laurent was the founder of one of the largest international sports investment groups in Europe. He sat on the boards of several professional football organizations. He funded youth academies across multiple countries, and he was considered one of the most influential figures in global sports development. Silence fell across the village. The words meant little to some of the older villagers, but they understood one thing immediately. The man they had welcomed into their homes was far more important than anyone had imagined. Youssef looked at Gabriel in complete shock. "You never told me any of that." Gabriel smiled. "You never asked." A few villagers laughed nervously. The tension eased for a moment. Then Gabriel's expression became serious. He turned toward everyone gathered around him. "A week ago, your village saved my life. No amount of money can repay that debt." The villagers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Nobody expected repayment. Nobody had helped him for that reason. Gabriel continued, "But while I was here, I discovered something far more valuable than the life I nearly lost." He looked directly at Youssef. Every head turned toward the boy. "I discovered extraordinary potential." The villagers stared at one another. Some looked confused. Others already suspected what he meant. Then Gabriel motioned toward one of the men standing behind him. A tall coach carrying a leather folder stepped forward. Another introduced himself as a youth development director. A third was a professional scout who had worked with elite academies across Europe. Suddenly, Youssef realized this visit had nothing to do with gratitude alone. Something much bigger was happening. The village square became completely silent. Even the children stopped talking. Gabriel took a step forward and held out a folder. Inside were documents, photographs, training plans, and admission papers. He handed them to Youssef's mother first. "I would like to offer Youssef a place at the Laurent International Football Academy." Nobody reacted at first. The words felt too distant to understand. The academy was located thousands of miles away. It trained talented young players from around the world. Some graduates had gone on to play professionally in Europe. Others represented their national teams. Gabriel continued carefully. "Everything will be covered. Education, housing, medical care, training, travel." Youssef stared at him, certain he had misunderstood. "You mean, I can visit?" Gabriel shook his head. "No." He smiled. "I mean you can join." The world seemed to stop. Youssef looked at his mother. His mother looked at him. Neither knew what to say. A year earlier, the idea would have sounded impossible. Even a month earlier, it would have sounded impossible. Yet here it was, standing directly in front of them. One of the coaches opened a laptop and showed videos of the academy facilities. Professional pitches, modern gyms, youth competitions, training centers. The villagers gathered around in amazement. Many had never even seen places like that before. Tears formed in Youssef's mother's eyes. She had spent years worrying about how to feed her family. Now someone was offering her son an opportunity she could never have imagined. Yet beneath the excitement was fear. The academy was far away. It meant leaving home, leaving family, leaving the mountains he had known his entire life. Gabriel seemed to understand exactly what they were feeling. He walked over and placed a hand on Youssef's shoulder. "This isn't a promise that you will become a star," Gabriel said honestly. "No one can make that promise." He paused. "What I can promise is that you deserve the chance to find out how far your talent can take you." Youssef looked down at the ground. His throat tightened. For years, he had dreamed of an opportunity. Now that opportunity was standing in front of him, and suddenly he was terrified of losing it. 3 weeks later, Youssef stood inside the Laurent International Football Academy for the first time. Everything felt overwhelming. The training complex alone was larger than his entire village. Perfect green fields stretched across the horizon. Modern buildings reflected sunlight through enormous glass walls. Players from dozens of countries moved between training sessions wearing professional equipment that cost more than anything Youssef's family owned. For the first time in years, doubt entered his mind. Maybe he did not belong here. The first weeks were harder than anything he had imagined. Many of the other players had been training professionally since childhood. They had private coaches, nutrition plans, and years of competitive experience. Youssef had none of those advantages. His first fitness test ended with him finishing near the bottom. During tactical sessions, he struggled to understand unfamiliar terminology. Some players laughed at his accent. Others mocked his old clothes and small village background. One boy from a wealthy European family openly asked why the academy had accepted a shepherd. Another joked that Youssef probably knew more about goats than football. The comments hurt, but they also reminded him of something. Back in the Atlas Mountains, people had doubted his dreams too. Yet he had continued anyway. Every morning he arrived before sunrise. Every night he stayed after training ended. While others relaxed, Youssef practiced passing drills alone. While others played video games, he studied match footage. When coaches assigned extra conditioning, he completed twice as much. Weeks became months. Months became years. Slowly, the gap began to close. Coaches noticed his work ethic first. Then they noticed his tactical intelligence. Then they noticed something impossible to teach: his ability to read the game. One afternoon, the academy director reviewed player evaluations. Several names received higher athletic scores. Several were technically stronger. Yet one report kept attracting attention. Joseph El Mansouri. Exceptional decision-making. Exceptional vision. Exceptional leadership potential. The director closed the file and smiled. Meanwhile, Youssef still felt as though he was fighting for survival. Then came the day that nearly changed everything. The academy's head coach called him into his office. The coach's face was serious. "You have talent," he said, "but talent alone isn't enough." Youssef remained silent. The coach leaned forward. "The next 6 months would determine whether you continue here or go home." The room fell silent. For the first time since leaving Morocco, Youssef faced the possibility that his dream could still disappear. The next 6 months became the most important period of Youssef's life. Every day felt like a final examination. Every training session felt like an audition. He pushed himself beyond exhaustion. When his body demanded rest, he continued. When failure seemed inevitable, he continued. Whenever doubt appeared, he remembered the notebook he had carried from the Atlas Mountains. He remembered the promises written inside. Never give up. Help my family. Play for Morocco. Reach the World Cup. Those words became his compass. The coaches began trusting him with greater responsibility. First, he earned a regular place in the academy's starting lineup. Then he became captain of his age group. Scouts from professional clubs started attending matches specifically to watch him play. Within a few years, Youssef signed his first professional contract. Then came another challenge: higher competition, faster players, greater pressure. Yet the same qualities that helped him survive the mountains helped him survive football: patience, discipline, determination. Season after season, he improved. One club became two. Two became three. Soon his performances attracted attention from the Moroccan Football Federation. The day he received his first national team call-up, he sat alone in his apartment for nearly an hour staring at the official letter. He thought about his mother, his sister, his village, Gabriel, and the snowy mountain where everything began. Years passed. International appearances followed. Then tournament qualifications. Then continental championships. Eventually the moment arrived that had lived inside his imagination since childhood. The World Cup. Standing in the tunnel before Morocco's opening match, Youssef closed his eyes. The noise of the stadium echoed around him. Players shifted nervously beside him. Cameras waited outside. Yet his thoughts traveled far away. Back to the Atlas Mountains. Back to a cold winter morning. Back to a starving shepherd boy carrying firewood through the snow. When he opened his eyes again, he was no longer that boy. He was a representative of his nation, a symbol of possibility. And as he stepped onto the field wearing Morocco's colors, millions of young dreamers saw proof that impossible journeys sometimes begin in forgotten places. But the greatest moment of his life had not happened yet. That moment was waiting just one match away. The stadium exploded with noise as Youssef stepped toward the ball. 93 minutes had been played. Morocco and their opponent remained deadlocked. One kick would decide everything. The referee blew the whistle. Youssef began his run. For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to slow down. The crowd disappeared. The pressure disappeared. The noise disappeared. All he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat. Then his foot struck the ball. It curved over the wall. Time stopped. Tens of thousands of fans followed its flight through the air. The goalkeeper launched himself toward the corner. Too late. The ball slammed into the top corner of the net. For a moment there was silence. Then the stadium erupted. Morocco had scored. Morocco had won. Teammates rushed toward Youssef from every direction. The bench emptied. Coaches sprinted onto the field. The crowd shook the stadium with deafening cheers. Some fans cried openly. Others fell to their knees. Across Morocco, entire cities erupted in celebration. In a small village hidden among the Atlas Mountains, people flooded into the streets. Children waved flags. Old men embraced each other. Youssef's mother sat in tears while neighbors celebrated around her. His sister could barely stop smiling. Thousands of miles away, the boy who once chased goats through the snow had become a hero to an entire nation. Yet amid the chaos, Youssef searched for only one face. Eventually he found it. High above the field, seated quietly among the guests, sat Gabriel Laurent. Older now, his hair almost completely gray, his movements slower than before. But his eyes remained exactly the same. The final whistle blew. Morocco advanced. Cameras surrounded Youssef almost immediately. Reporters pushed forward. Microphones appeared from every direction. One journalist asked the question everyone wanted answered. Youssef, when you look back on your journey from a poor shepherd boy to the World Cup, who changed your life? The crowd waited. Millions watching around the world waited. Youssef looked toward the stands, toward the man who had once arrived in his village as a dying stranger buried beneath the snow. His voice trembled slightly as he answered. People think I saved him. The reporter looked confused. Youssef smiled. 10 years ago, I found a man in the mountains and helped bring him home. He paused. I thought I was saving a stranger. Tears formed in his eyes. But the truth is, he saved my future. The cameras turned toward Gabriel. The old man lowered his head and wiped away a tear. For a moment, neither wealth nor fame mattered. Neither helicopters nor football academies mattered. What mattered was a simple act of kindness between two human beings. One chose to help when he could have walked away. The other chose to recognize potential when the world could not see it. And together, those two decisions changed everything. Later that night, after the celebrations ended and the stadium lights began to fade, Youssef stood alone on the field. Above him, the giant scoreboard replayed the winning goal. He remembered the notebook he once kept beside his bed in the Atlas Mountains. He remembered the promises written inside. Never give up. Help my family. Play for Morocco. Reach the World Cup. Every promise had come true. Then he looked toward the empty stands one last time and smiled. Because deep down he understood something that millions of viewers would carry with them long after the story ended. Greatness rarely begins in famous places. Sometimes it begins in forgotten villages. Sometimes it begins in the middle of a snowstorm. And sometimes, all it takes to change a life forever is the courage to help a stranger. If Youssef's journey touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story with your friends and family. Stories like this remind us that we should never judge someone by where they start in life. Sometimes the person standing in the shadows today may become the inspiration of millions tomorrow. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.